other than a primary active transporter. All right? A channel is not a pump, it is a channel. That's facilitated diffusion. A pump is a transporter that pumps molecules up a gradient. And so for right now, this is all you need to know. When it comes to sodium and potassium, we're going to give ourselves a visual. Make sodium nice and big on the outside of the cell and little on the inside of the cell. That's showing us that the concentration of sodium under normal conditions is very high on the outside of cells and low on the inside of cells. Potassium is the complete opposite. Potassium is very high on the inside and low on the outside. Later on this semester, you're going to have to know the exact concentrations. Right now, big, small, big, small. That's it. Now, given these concentrations, we have a gradient, right? That's what a gradient is, a difference across the membrane. Which way will sodium move passively? Which way will potassium move passively? So sodium will move passively into the cell, right? Down the gradient, correct? We can see that, passively. Potassium should move out of the cell passively, but we're not talking about passive transport. We're talking about active transport. So actively, these particular molecules, both of them, via this transporter, are going to move up the gradients. Sodium is actually going to move out of the cell. Potassium is going to move into the cell. Now, that's not easy for that transporter to do. It will need energy in the form of ATP. A primary active transporter uses ATP directly. It will literally bind ATP. It will cleave the last phosphate bond, and energy will be released so that this transporter can move these molecules up their gradients. Regardless of what type of primary active transporter we're talking about, no matter how many molecules it moves, some of these transporters will move one, some will move two, some will move three molecules. It doesn't matter how many, they're all going to move up their gradient. Primary active transporters move all molecules up gradients. This transporter moving these sodium ions out and the potassium ions in against the gradients actually create the gradients. The gradients are actually created by this transporter, and I want you to know that. The sodium-potassium's job, what is its function? What is its only function? To create the sodium and potassium gradients. And in so doing, they have to keep on moving molecules up the gradients, but that's okay, they don't mind. That's their job. What if I got rid of ATP? What if all of a sudden this cell no longer makes ATP? Let's say something happened to the mitochondria and glycolysis could not occur inside of this cell and it couldn't make ATP. What would happen to the concentrations of sodium and potassium? What would they be? They'd be equal. Without without ATP, sodium concentration, the inside and outside of the cell, potassium concentration inside and out of that cell would be equal to each other. Guess what's going to happen to this cell? It's done. And so are you. All right? These gradients for sodium and potassium and all of the ions that we'll be talking about need to be maintained. If they're not, the cell is screwed, and so are you. Okay? Are you with me on that? All right? And again, grab, throw, just like facilitated diffusion. It's no different. Okay? Are we good? So ATP is being used directly. Here's the pretty picture. These are the sodium ions leaving, these are the potassium ions coming in. This is the ATP being cleaved, and we get energy from it. And it allows this transporter to work properly. Okay? Let's take a break. When we come back, secondary active transport.
Yeah, that's good.
Black screen. Got a nice picture of my leg. Hopefully last.
Come on.
Not
Come
cool.
on. Let's reenact oxygen.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
How does
An Aries.
I feel like I have to wash my hands. I touch that.
I haven't, okay, to be honest, I found it, like I knew where it was, but I didn't find it. So yeah, that knows.
Have you been washing your hands for that? Have you been touching your desk?
Haven't touching your chest?
Why does the death count?
Because other those people talk on there.
No,
Yeah,
I literally,
some people just
I
like
found it, I found it,
Like Jason.
I found it because I got drilled.
Like, have you ever?
No, it's been like 3 years since I've been probably longer than that. Right? No, you
You like, can I please?
can't keep it. You have your own. You can use it.
why would you?
I did it. It's a new look.
Something you don't like and be like, I saw somebody raise.
Oh, there's two.
Like a creative
He's on. I hope Instagram never dies.
You know, I wish I could get that.
He said you're early.
You are such a dude. Honestly.
Look at him.
Don't do it, no. Ours? Oh, ours? No.
Oh, did you give me mine back?
But I
No, you have to bring it.
this
No,
one's
but
much
this one's more
nicer.
of a workout. Look at such strong.
Now
I'm not
gonna
very strong.
get
I can't use that one. You should go take one for the team and ask me questions. Take away that first.
Okay, so continuing on. So we just got done talking about primary active transport. How about secondary now? Secondary active transport, as it says in the notes, it's going to use ATP indirectly. I'm going to explain what that means in just a second. We're still going to move at least one molecule against its gradient. But something that's unique about secondary active transport is that we're going to actually move another molecule down its gradient, which is passive. But believe it or not, moving that molecule down that gradient gives the transporter energy. All right, so we're going to draw it. So let's draw a secondary active transport. We're going to draw this basically, except hopefully we make it a little bit more clear. So we're going to draw a cell again. We're going to make the shape of this transporter different. Let's make it squared. So that's a secondary active transporter. Now again, remind me, sodium, high outside or inside? Outside. So give ourselves a visual. Sodium's nice and big out here, little in here, because a gradient was created by the primary active transporter, correct? Potassium must be thorough, high in here, and it's low out there. This particular transporter, this secondary active transporter, and we'll label it secondary active transporter. We're not going to give it a name like we gave the other one, the sodium-potassium pump. We're just going to say it's a secondary active transporter. We're going to see how it works. So what this transporter does, or what it wants to do, is it wants to take a molecule, I'm going to call it X. I'm going to say that the concentration of X on the outside of the cell, and what X is, it doesn't matter. It can be glucose, it can be an amino acid, it doesn't matter what it is. It's not sodium though, I can tell you that. X is some molecule, doesn't matter. I'm going to give it a concentration. I'm going to say that it's 20. I'm going to say inside the cell, it's 50. Which way, if we were to move that molecule actively, not passively, actively, which direction should it go actively? It should go up its gradient. So up its gradient, it should go in or out of the cell. In, right? From a low concentration to a high concentration, that's active transport. And that's what this transporter wants to do, just like this transporter was doing it with sodium. It was moving it up its gradient, it was moving potassium up its gradient. This transporter wants to move X up its gradient. It can't do it unless something happens first. That is, it needs to move some other molecule down its gradient to give it energy. What is that molecule that's most often used with secondary active transport? It's sodium. This transporter will move sodium down that's down its gradient, right? From a high concentration to a low concentration, correct? Is that down its gradient? That is down the gradient. The X is up a gradient, and that's going to give that transporter the energy, the thermodynamic energy it needs in order to move X up its gradient. So a secondary active transporter will move at least one molecule down its gradient so that it'll work, so that it can move at least one other molecule up its gradient so that it can do its ultimate job. The job of this transporter is to move X. That's its concern. Not so much to move sodium. It uses sodium to move X. And by the way, it doesn't have to go in the same direction. So we can draw it on this. So let's draw another one over here. This is another transporter, a secondary active transporter. I'm just trying to bring home a point here. That will also use the sodium gradient for energy, so it'll move it into the cell, but it can move a molecule out, so we can call it Y. So we can say that Y, I don't know, how about make it 30 here, how about we make Y 60 out here, that would still be up the gradient, correct? So moving Y up a gradient is done by moving sodium into a gradient. So I wanted to make sure that you understand that they don't have to go in the same direction, they can very well go in opposite directions. The bottom line is this, is that one's going to go down, and the one that's the transporter is most concerned with is going up a gradient. And in the notes it says that this particular transporter uses ATP indirectly. So what does that mean? Because I didn't draw ATP in this picture at all. But if we didn't have ATP, would we have this sodium gradient? Would it exist without ATP? Which way would the sodium move without ATP? Which way does it move, in or out of the cell? It doesn't, because there's no gradient. There's no net movement. If there's no ATP, there's no gradient. Why? Because that can't work, and that's what makes the gradient. So the sodium-potassium pump uses ATP directly, and in so doing, creates this gradient so that that transporter can work. That's what it means by indirect. This transporter needs ATP around so that the gradient of sodium is present so that it can work. That transporter needs the gradient. If there's no ATP, no gradient. No gradient, that transporter's out of a job. Okay, and that was your question earlier. Somebody came up to me and asked me, why do we need a gradient? I don't know where you are right now. He asked the question, why do we need a gradient? Well, here's a reason right here. Other stuff doesn't work inside of the cell if gradients do not exist. And we'll talk about a bunch of other stuff for the next 2 semesters where a sodium gradient is necessary. Are we good? A secondary active transport. It's still an active transport mechanism. Why? Because we're moving some molecule up a gradient. Even though one of them is moving down, it doesn't matter. Something is moving up. So by definition, that's what trumps. Okay? The movement of the molecule up the gradient trumps the passive movement. Okay? The passive movement is a means by which the transporter works, but it's not its main job. Its main job is to move the molecule up the gradient. All right? Good? Yes? Okay. Which time we got? Oh, good. We're good. We got here at 6, right? Okay, we're good. Oh, and by the way, saturation, same thing. Saturation still holds true. We talk about saturated transporter. These